I'm real excited to be able to have this conversation with everybody. It's been a long time since I've actually had to talk to groups about unionization and what's happening. I spent a great deal of my life in HR, pretty much over a couple of decades, trying to create work environments where unions were not necessary in companies. And where I wasn't successful there, I spent time trying to communicate and make sure people understood what they were getting from the employer and what a union could offer. And for years, have not had to pick that up or talk about it again. But it is true that there is a renewed interest in unionism at this point. Jeff, you could go to the next slide. That'd be terrific. Um, there's no doubt there's an upsurge in union activity, or maybe better stated, frontline organizing activity related to really frontline workers being disgruntled or disenfranchised by the employee experience. Not just employee engagement, but employee experience being their entire life cycle, their entire work cycle with their employer. Um, the footprints that unions are creating still remains in the 11% range, at least the most recent statistics that I've seen, which isn't obviously a massive portion of our workforce, and it's staying about the same. But there are some noticeable changes. There's some noticeable trends happening around union activity. And there's several signs, I think, of very increased activity, again, specifically related more to the employee experience than kind of that employee engagement aspect of things. And I think, we highlight four things here. When you look at some of the recent studies and surveys that are out there, it's really kind of fits into four areas that I can see in that. And one is around pay. It's really more the perceived or real inequality of pay that is agitating activity. The transparency around pay and who gets paid what and how they get paid and those kinds of things. So that's an area that I see coming up and being part of some of the union activity that's going on out there. I think stability and in trying to put this together, trying to think through exactly what would resonate from a stability standpoint. It's really the ability to have some control over an individual frontline worker's work life. And it goes to things like schedules, and it goes to things that probably haven't been front and center of a lot of people's minds. The whole idea around working remotely and what that means and what that doesn't mean, and who can work remotely and who can't work remotely, and some fairness and consistency around those things. I think some of the aspect around greater control. Life happens, and a recognition that life happens, and given myself as a frontline worker the ability to have some control over that. If I have a sick child, how can I manage that and still be able to pay the rent that week? So I think stability is probably becoming much more important. And when I look at some of the most recent, some of the more highly publicized union drives that are going on right now and success, it seems to me it's really impacting that stability factor that we see. I think benefits is still high in the list of things that are causing this disenfranchisement of the frontline worker with their employer. A lot of it, though, is shifted from healthcare things, which is still important, don't get me wrong, but it's also turned to safety factors, the ability, and I think COVID drove some of that, the ability to work safely, the ability to not have issues that put my life at jeopardy. in the workplace. I think there's been some things recently about closing bathrooms and those kinds of things because of who are attracted. So this whole area around benefits is not just the kind of benefits, retirement, healthcare, that kind of thing, but I think it's more about safety and benefits within a safe work environment. And the last is this concept around being disconnected. And this is a one that I have always found throughout my career working in this space. The ability for employers to really connect with their frontline workforce. Sometimes it goes to just not listening as well as what should be listened to. I think there are clues, and I used to always talk to our management when there was union activity that, basically we caused it by not listening. And I found that to be a very true statement. And so the connection becomes not just talking to people, not just talking to the front line, but actually getting a chance to have feedback from the front line, what's resonating, what's not resonating, and then reacting to it, obviously, which causes that connection. And when we don't have that, you end up having a disconnect. So I think those are kind of some of the trends of why I see some of this happening. The interesting part to me is, as we've been talking about the Great Resignation over the last few years, some of these things are the exact same things, and some of these things are what causes the Great Resignation. The danger to me, in some ways, as an employer, and coming from an employer perspective, is with the resignation, people left your workplace, and they may have been upset, and I know all of the difficulties that creates. But I think that's got to be balanced with people that are disenfranchised or actually even possibly toxic in your workplace, but they're still in your workplace. And they're impacting those that maybe feel good about the company. And so it's, how do you create an environment where you have more people being your allies and less being your antagonists? So Jeff, if you could go to our first poll, I would appreciate it. So those are the things we see as being some of the challenges and some of the things out there, the changes that are happening and things that are impacting. But I'm always very curious when I get a chance to talk to our customers and what they see, what they're feeling. So we've put a poll together. I put up some of the things that are what I read about, what I research, what I'm hearing. But I'd love to kind of, if you wouldn't mind responding to this poll, and if there are other things, possibly put it in the chat so we can kind of see what those other things are. And we'll take a few minutes just to have you take a shot at responding to some of it. Okay. Up. Just when I thought maybe we had it, it changed. So I think when you look at it, it's not surprising, because that's kind of where some of the trends are. That ability to connect and have two-way communications is important. Pay, and that sense of pay inequality or expectations around pay is still a very strong component of disenfranchisement. I think when you look at the kinds of things that you can do to provide pay is both just not in just the hourly rate, but the ability for people to have some control over when they work, not having to lose out on pay because they can't work at a particular time. But Jeff, anything that strikes you on this?
No, it's interesting. I think that, to me, Mike, I think there is some relationship with that power of the communications and then the pay expectations as well, and having that dialogue. But I think we're seeing, from a pay and the level set from there, and more so than ever in the last 2 to 3+ years, especially since COVID and economy the way it is. I think this I would have probably said it. That doesn't surprise me too much, Mike.
No, I agree. I agree. It is interesting that the post-COVID safety concerns are lower, and I don't know if that's evolving out of the whole COVID aspect of things, or whether other things have become more important. But that'll be an interesting one for us to follow. So can you go to the next slide for me, Jeff, please? So when you look at it, the total unionization rate, what is actually happening, at least in the last quarter of last year and the first quarter of this year, is staying about in that same 10.3% range. What's up dramatically, and truly in my 20 some odd years, I don't think I ever saw the amount of union activity be up, as we say, 57%, by over 50%. And these are filings that come out of the National Labor Relations Board. So to create a union, you need to file a petition with the National Labor Relations Board saying that you want to be represented. And that's what's really up. And so I think towards the end of the year, depending on what happens and what employers do around the whole unionization aspect of things, it'll be interesting to see whether that 10.3 or 11% number goes up. But again, I go back to the causes of it seem to me to not just be happening in the last quarter of 2021 and the first quarter, but it's really what's been happening over probably the last 5-6 years, which is around this whole concept of Great Resignation. And I know it got most of its press in the last 2 or 3 years, but if you look at trends and you go back, it's really been going on for a while. And it's, employers being able to adjust to some of that. And I think, still unions have, in most people's heads, when you look at polls, unions do have some element of support from the general populace, and some belief that they bring some balance to the total economic picture. Jeff, you wouldn't mind going to the next one? And that's kind of, found in the data that we have here. Over 2/3 of those surveyed by the Associated Press and Gallup, Americans had an approval of labor unions, had a positive perception of labor unions. It jumps up rather significantly when you look at a younger segment of the population. And I think we're seeing more of that ability to feel represented, to feel like I've got a community behind me, is becoming much more important. And it's, again, I think this wage inequality and what has happened, and when you look at this younger population group, we're not talking about people making hundreds of thousands of dollars, but over half are making a living wage over in that $40,000, depending on where you live. But it is impacting a number of things that are going on, I think, in this whole disenfranchisement aspect of things. Jeff, if you wouldn't mind, the next one. So that's kind of the data that's out there, and when you look at what is the ultimate cause, particularly some of these most recent activity that is that's occurring out there right now, what created it? It really falls into these 3 areas. So you've got activity that happens, and that's kind of the 4 we talked about. And then you've got when it's successful, when the union activity is successful, what causes that, and why are they being successful? And it's really these 3 aspects from what I can get out of most of the research that I've been able to do. And it comes down to, again, as you all indicated in the poll, wage inequality is a significant issue. working conditions, which is that whole safety aspect of things. It's that whole experience part of things. It's forced overtime. It's things that I think a lot of us kind of see as tough working conditions, may be necessary. I was working with a customer recently and talking to them, and they got a huge labor shortage, and they've got lots of customers, and they're having to extend people and have people work 6 days a week, or six or 7 days a week. Not necessarily being accepted well by their frontline workers. Obviously in areas like healthcare and teaching and that frontline customer facing group, working conditions and how that's all handled, I think is really important. And then I think, well, in our poll, it had a little less. There still are things related to how the company responded to COVID. What were those things they did to protect the safety, to protect the mental health of individuals that were frontline workers that had to come into work during the COVID period of time, whether it's in healthcare or whether it's in retail or hospitality or any of those kinds of things. That seems to be what's causing not just the activity, but the successful activity of some of the activity that's out there. And Jeff, if you could go to the next slide. So I'm sure everybody is wanting to say, okay, that's great, Mike, and kind of get it and understand, and but so what can be done about it? And kind of what we're talking through, and Jeff's going to go into this in much more detail in just a few minutes, are really these 4 areas. And one is to be adaptable. Some people call it being agile. I like the word adaptable a little bit, but be able to adapt. And we're seeing that with a lot of our customers, the ability to adapt. It's amazing to me, when you first go in, and obviously we're a world-class digital workplace platform. People thinking about having iPhones or phones of any sort on the floor were unheard of. But now companies that do it are seeing that there's a great connection with their folks between that and the fact that they're able to access the information, whether it's product information or policies, right there on the workplace. And the adoption rate is in the 90%, and that's encouraged by employers. So being adaptable and just what is new technology able to bring. There's this whole concept out there that I'm very intrigued by at this point of taking the onboarding process and making it almost an everboarding process where people are kind of assimilated and worked with, and they're experienced that assimilation process throughout their entire career. Some very interesting things happening in this whole ability for people to look at the employee experience in total. And I'm sure Jeff will go into much more detail around that. Accepting and learning, we're all learning new ways to learn. And it's that ability to not just have to be in a classroom. I know for a long time in my career, it was all about getting seats or getting people in the seats and having them sit through an hour and a half, 90-minute training. And I think we've all come to learn that that's not the way the newer employees, the newer workers, frontline workers out there want to learn. And it's the kind of that Netflix aspect of things. And even myself, I find myself, I try to take a master class twice a week, and it's all done online. It's 20 minutes, half hour, that type of thing, and pick up that information. And it's the ability for frontline workers to have in the palm of their hand the ability to learn the things that allow them to be promotable, that allows then for them to either pick up new assignments or possibly have a pay increase because they learn new skills. But rather than having to sit in a classroom, which oftentimes are limited, what you have is that ability to do it on an iPad or on your phone and do it in short bursts. And it's an area that I think some of the more progressive employers are looking at being able to revisit and find new ways to allow people to learn and grow in their career. And Jeff's got some customer cases that he'll share with you a little bit more. Flexibility. I think the biggest area here is around scheduling and control of my work life. And quite honestly, schedules become a major part of that. And, I think of recognition, and I know for many years, schedules were given to people. This is what you're going to work. And they had to work it. Reality was sick calls would go up or lack of attendance would go up. I've shared the story several times with my former employer, but when we first started looking at some of this stuff, schedules and lack of flexibility of schedules was the number 2 reason people were leaving the company. So I think the ability to be a little more flexible, to allow people to trade schedules or to pick up where they have the ability to pick up additional schedules, all kind of shows that flexibility, that caring. I mean, that really is what goes to the employee experience. And then I think, as we've talked about, is that ability to connect. And how do employers at all levels, whether it's the CEO or the regional manager or the district manager, the manager, how do they end up connecting with their frontline staff, and how to do it without filters? And filters being, I know from prior experiences talking to a customer, it was almost taking 3 weeks for headquarter messages to get to the frontline worker because it went through different levels. And by the time it got down in that 3 weeks, it was basically old news. And what was happening now with a digital workplace is you can literally get it out in seconds and make it extremely relevant. But more importantly, and I know Jeff will go into this in a lot of detail, the ability to get feedback, to listen, not just tell, but to listen to what's on people's minds is really important. So I think the last that I will leave with this, and then I'll turn it over to Jeff to get more detail, is one of the major successes of a lot of the union activity out there is using digital communications. And I know folks are whether it's WhatsApp or some other aspect that they're able to get out there. And I think we as employers need to get out and show that we have the ability to engage people, to create a positive employee experience through the use of digital communication. So Jeff, I'm going to let you go into it more and chat a little bit more about some of the things we're hearing from our customers.
Hey, thanks, Mike. We do have a poll if we want to.
Yes, I'm sorry.
No.
My bad. I apologize. We do have a poll. So we've come up with these 3 things, or the 4 aspects that we just talked about a little bit. And if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to see if you have a point of view on which is most likely to have the greatest impact. So why don't we turn the poll over and we'll kind of see what we get from there. And I'm not going to prejudge because I did last time and it turned out I was wrong. Okay. Yeah, I think flexibility, Jeff, and I know you're going to cover some ways that that's being done, but I think that is clearly almost 50% of folks believe that is the way to go. And I tend to agree. I think that helps quite a bit, even though we're getting some movement here. I'm watching. And And I think that kind of is that adapt aspect of it too, is being okay as an employer with people having that ability and trusting them to pick up schedules and making sure schedules are traded the right way, which gives them greater control over their work life.
Absolutely.
So I'll turn it back to you and let you kind of take it from there.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. I appreciate you setting the stage for me and really just reviewing, these strategies that, we've come to learn and live. So welcome, everyone. I'm going to spend the next few moments just really talking about some real life use cases and what these mean in terms of these 4 strategies. Adapting, much easier said than not. I think the first part of adapting is connect to your employees, and it's not connect in terms of from a communications. That's not what I mean by that. It means connect to know and understand, your field, your frontline staff that's out there, and being able to adapt to there. So one, when we look at that, growth within organizations is a key within, really every new hires. Where do they go, beyond, their first introduction, their first day on the job, and where does it go? And it really stems from, with customers that are able to connect and put out these polls within their digital workplace, and to really understand what those employees are needing to have that work-life satisfaction and that balance to it. Another piece that we're seeing such a huge trend in is, as we've talked about the Great Resignation, now the Great Retention, what that means, it's really wanting to better understand. Organizations are better wanting to understand where their folks, their frontline staffs are wanting to go within these organizations, right? So it's not just, this position is what I was hired for, but they're going to, as they become brand ambassadors for your organizations, they're going to want to grow. And it's going to take that opportunity for you all to understand where those folks are wanting to grow and offer that upward mobility within those organizations, which obviously has such a positive impact on retention across the board. And as we saw in that poll, it's that flexibility for that work-life balance. My daughter works for a large retailer, and it is amazing, through their digital workplace journey and what they're doing today of really being able to provide that work life. So, the concept of clopenings and those pieces where they were being scheduled originally in those roles. Now she has the ability to say, I'm willing to close on a Monday and open on a Tuesday in order to have a Wednesday off. And so organizations are really starting to adapt to that and say, okay, there is that input, and this really ties into a little bit of the flexibility that I'll talk about from a scheduling standpoint. But as employers, we need to adapt to, a new workforce that's out there, especially coming on the heels of COVID, and how we have to adapt to the change in environment and landscape within our organizations today. Connecting. So it's interesting. I remember the days, 20 plus years ago, when communication was one of those things that was really forced from the top down. What we're seeing today is communication really stems from the bottom up and top down, and it meets in the middle. And the meeting in the middle is that part of that social concept, right? So within digital workplace, they have the ability to share different happenings within these organizations, and you see this pride come across. We have a large customer that built a channel, and it was a channel that essentially was, we're in this together. And the response on just that one channel within their digital workplace, I would say it went viral within that organization, meaning that, where they would see lower transactions, it was their frontline staff was wanting to communicate with their peers, and not just peers in their current, building and in their current footprint, but across the organization. And it really started, within a small nation, but they grew quickly into a global communication channel that they were able to, share and communicate with their peers and fellow brand ambassadors across the world. And I think that's where that connection happens, because you're building that brand ambassador. Obviously, that communication from a bottom up is one of those things that we need to hear. And it's no longer, hey, I'm going to send out a pulse survey, I'm going to do this within the organization. It's right there front and center for everyone. It offers that space, a space to connect. And it's been interesting to see those different communication channels and connections that happen out there. One of the things that I see as from an employer perspective is that you actually have visibility into things to really understand, what folks are saying out there, right? And so whether it's, I want to, I had a customer, they had a communication channel in their digital workplace that said, hey, we're going to stage a walkout. Amazingly, the organization read that, saw that, and they were able to intersect that and address the problem head on. Now, without a digital workplace, that could have happened on any numerous ways of communicating that was before, right? So whether it was texting or the different social apps that are out there via Facebook and those that you didn't have that control before. Now you have that visibility through that digital workplace, and they were able to address it. They didn't bury their head in the sand. It wasn't about, staging that walkout. It was about listening to that frontline staff and those concerns that really was somewhat of a pandemic across other folks. And so they were able to take that approach through their digital workplace.
Jeff, if I can just interrupt. I know some questions that come from our customers when there's union activity and how to handle some of this. And, the reality of it is, guys, I think they're already communicating. If you don't give them the channels or the ability to communicate, and they're doing it on WhatsApp, they're doing it on Facebook, they're doing it other places. And the ability to have this kind of release that Jeff was just talking about is so critical to kind of breaking down that disenfranchisement and allowing your frontline workers to come back and trust and understand the perspectives of the employer. So it's already happening out there, but this is a great way for you to become part of that process.
Great point, Mike. Absolutely. I think it's really multi-directional communication that's happening out there today. And, employees, frontline staff, they want their voice to be heard and be connected to and be part of that organization. So, yeah, great point. Accept and learn. So when you look at what has been traditionally the onboarding process, that whether it was, day one, it could have been day 14, day 60, most organizations overall kind of lose touch with those folks, say after, 90 days, 120 days. You might have some feedback at the 1 year or multiple milestones. Within your digital workplace, you have that ability at your fingertips to streamline that onboarding, whether it's, in terms of a document repository and one-stop shop for all of their HR paperwork, whether it's completed, executed, or storage repository of those that have been done. Also standard operating procedures, right? And all part of their onboarding that you're empowering them, not with an abundance of data, but in a timed approach to it. So maybe there's communications that go out, at the 2-week mark of hire date, but maybe there's additional communications that go out a year later, a year and a half later. And it's really an inquisition of, are you happy where you are, or do you find something new that you want to pursue? And then what that does is when you streamline that onboarding, it presents a whole nother it unlocks a whole nother potential to actually have micro learnings be part of that streamlined path. And so when you look at that path forward and upward based upon, where your frontline staff is wanting to go, traditionally what I've seen and what I was a part of was I was very successful in one position, and they're like, oh, we're going to promote you to an assistant manager. We're going to promote you to a manager, just based upon those merits. Had nothing to do with my desire at that point. And so by being able to bring in, from a streamlined everboarding process to be able to present career path opportunities to where they feel vested, they feel that you're vested in their growth. And having these learnings, being able to have, micro learnings within their digital workplace. I often say, when we look at, accepting and learning of these opportunities, podcasts are have grown exponentially. in terms of how people listen or even how people read books these days. And now, by having their digital workplace and presenting micro learnings and having a whole curriculum that's tied to individual career paths, not just positional career paths, but individuals and where they want to go within there. It absolutely scales to trainings. And so it's trainings on the floor. We often see that, there are those curriculums for a new hire from a training perspective, or maybe for advancement within the organizations. Where the game has changed in the digital workplace is with introduction of task management. So being able to have operational execution within those floors, and then be able to release trainings based upon the feedback or based upon any potential violations that are reported from those folks. And what you're seeing, and Mike, you talked about this a little in the beginning, was even around the safety and the compliance aspect and those working environments that are happening out there. By accepting and learning from that frontline staff, we're learning, and our folks on the digital workplace are learning that, the assessments that are happening out there, these audits, these self-safety inspections that are happening, it's reducing those violations from a working condition. Whether it's, we have one of the DC organizations that we have today, their big piece was, hey, we want these folks to fill out this paperwork and to fill out, the safety inspection on the equipment that they're getting ready to run. Now they just scan a QR code, can check it off. And what they found was that their working conditions absolutely improved from a safety standpoint, right? So a good example of that whole process was before these forms weren't getting filled out. And then somebody goes and jumps on a forklift that had a broken wheel or a broken hydraulic hose that was never reported. And now there's a potential safety incident. Now having that digital workplace at their fingertips and being able just to scan a QR code and do a quick audit, and then taking that information from that audit, and whether that creates a service order that goes out to their servicing agent for that, or it decommissions that forklift until such point, that power of that digital workplace is improving those working conditions, because we know immediately and we know how we need to react immediately based upon that feedback from that frontline staff, as well as the training on the floor of how they would learn and listen from that standpoint. Then I really want to bring it home, and this is something that being a former customer and on the customer side, it has been key. I would also say, as a parent of two young adults, I've learned the art of being flexible. And it's really to understand, where the other one and the other party, the frontline staff, is coming from within their digital workplace. One of the things that you've heard, is that being flexible and being able to change based upon those processes that you've already established, but being able to rewrite those processes in order to really, understand that voice of your frontline staff. One of the big opportunities that you're going to see in the digital workplace is to have availability adjustments. We all know life changes. We all know that lemons get thrown at us often. Being able to be flexible, to understand, that we know we have a business to run, but within the digital workplace, being able to allow those folks to change their availabilities, to be able to say, oh, yes, but then what do you do with those, right? So yes, call-offs happen. As we said, it's almost a chicken and the egg. When you are flexible in your scheduling processes, and you can listen to that voice in terms of, hey, I can pick up these open shifts, I can offer shifts to folks. When you allow them to take their own schedules and have an input into their schedules, that is their availability, right? They're telling you right there, it's no longer an availability problem. You have that right there. What we've seen, and quantifiably speaking, is that the number of call-offs are drastically reduced when your frontline staff has a vested interest in picking their schedules. They're working when they want to work, and they're going to show up, and they're going to be happy because that's where they want to be. You don't want folks, and traditionally is what happened, in the traditional workforce management worlds, where "Now, here's a labor curve, here's our volume. Great, I need bodies in here." And people were showing, having to show up on a Thursday evening, which that was their one, evening that they had available to go do from a work-life balance and perform those things. Now, within the digital workplace, they're able to pick up those shifts, or they're able to offer those shifts. So whether they're communicating through a channel or through direct messages of the digital workplace, they're able to communicate with their peers and offer those up and not put that ownership on the managers. And it gives them that sense of control of their schedules to offer those shifts up on a qualified basis. And by that, I want to bring it home with, fair access to shifts. So when we put that onus on managers and that frontline staff, well, what we see is it's somewhat subjective in the eyes of that manager who they're going to offer that shift to. Within the digital workplace and what's happening in what we're seeing in operations today is those shifts are offered across the board, right? So it's no longer a preferential of, Jeff, I know him, I know he needs more hours, I'm going to offer it to Jeff. When you look at that fairness, you can offer shifts out in terms of a timely fashion so everybody has the same amount of time to respond and apply for a shift. Or maybe you want to look at it based upon seniority and honor some seniority in some of your scheduling, right? So in healthcare, large presence we have in healthcare, it allows them to really bring in those philosophies of what does it mean to be fair to that frontline staff in terms of scheduling and fairness in terms of that work-life balance. And being flexible is one of those things that we're seeing, and I think the poll has showed Mike, in terms of the need to be flexible, especially given the times that we're in today, the workforce that's coming out, both out of high school, out of college, out of post-college. We need to be flexible in order to sustain that brand and the operations that we have today. Mike, I don't know if you had any comments from that, or I'll turn it back over to you, Mike.
No, I first want to just thank you for joining. I always am fascinated hearing your experiences and what you've gone through. And I think hopefully, to the audience, and there is going to be a few minutes here left for questions, and I think we have a couple. I truly believe that what we're experiencing, while the unionization aspect of it has more minds and minefields than the Great Resignation, the causes, the reasons that it's happening, I think are very closely intertwined. And so I think that focusing as an employer on the total employee experience and how is their work life, and do they understand what they're supposed to be doing? Are they getting the training they need? Is as important as many of the aspects that we looked at from employee engagement. So I want to thank everybody for their time today. Am I correct that we have a couple questions, or?
We sure do. We do have about 3. Okay, I can go ahead and ask the first one. What is the best course of action as far as communicating with managers about how to address questions or comments about a union coming in? This questioner references the acronym of TIPS, which I'm not sure about, but perhaps you guys might be familiar with that.
Hey, Jeff, you're okay. I'll take it. I'll take this one if that's all right.
You go right ahead, Mike.
Yeah, TIPS is threaten, intimidate, or promise, which is what you can't do. Great question, and I do appreciate it. I will tell you that the first thing I would do if you get word of it is to get your labor lawyer involved, because there's so many aspects of it. But that said, advice that I've given in my past is first to deal with it. Oftentimes we as managers tend to shy away. We don't bring it up. But I would encourage managers, first and foremost, if it comes up, to to get some advice from your HR department, get some advice from a labor lawyer if you have it. But if not, I think the best thing to do is first to fall on the tips and know not to threaten that the store will close, or threaten that the business will close, or threaten anything, you'll lose your job. You don't do any threats, you don't intimidate, and you don't promise. We'll make this better, we'll fix it, that kind of thing. The other things you got to be very, very careful of is you don't create a situation where there's spying that goes on. One of the major areas around the National Labor Relations Act is sometimes, and I've seen it happen, frontline workers invite their manager to join them at a union meeting, or a manager hides behind a tree and tries to listen to what the union rep is saying to an employee so they can be more knowledgeable about what to say. All of that is not good behavior. That's not legal behavior and should not be done. So I wouldn't encourage any managers to try to do that. I always suggest, if it comes up, to just ask, what facts do you have that the workplace would be better off with a union versus what we provide today? And the most important part of it is not so much the answer, but listening for what are the issues. What are the causes that have caused people to want to look out for a union, to listen to that without making any promises. Oh, we can fix that, or we can take. Again, you want to listen and hear what the issues might be. But then I'm going to kind of, so I think just asking the factual questions. Why is that? What facts do you have? I think are fine questions. Don't want to engage in a ton of conversation at that point without getting some directed training. I know when I was in a situation and we were having to do this, we had very extensive training with our managers around what they can say, what they can't say, how to deal with it, how to manage it. And if you get yourselves into a situation where you have union activity, highly recommend that you rely on a labor lawyer to give some guidance. So hopefully, Joelle, that kind of gives an overview. Without knowing the issues, it's hard to specifically say what should be said.
Understood. Thank you. We have a couple of questions about flexibility. The first one, where you have set schedules and no open shifts, how do you apply flexibility? And then the other question asks perhaps something very similar. How do you provide flexibility to associates in a retail grocery store, or specifically in the retail grocery sector?
You want to take that, Jeff?
I was going to say, Mike, if you don't mind, I'd like to take this in any color for sure. I think to the first point, for those organizations that have those set schedules, where we see and have seen a ton of flexibility is obviously in call-offs, right? With set schedules, that's going to be higher statistically proven from there. What's happening in terms of that flexibility with those set schedules is being able to put that out and be flexible to bring in other folks that are obviously not scheduled, but qualified to work in those positions. So that's one approach, is by being able to take those call-offs and turn those into a positive. We've also seen to where attendance violations, accrual violations, meaning that let's say you're late to work and you get a demerit or an attendance violation, by picking up those open shifts, you can actually credit back those attendance. And so, because it's good for the organization, and that's oftentimes what we're seeing is that's provided that flexibility, and it really helps in that staffing from being short staffed and gives that flexibility. Also, where we've seen a lot of the flexibility on the set schedules is where you do have those gaps in schedules, using part-timers to subsidize those areas of opportunity and those gaps in there. Which really takes me to that second part of that question, Joelle, which is around, grocery and retail grocers and what's happening out there. Those, both of what I had just mentioned are really two huge practices that we're seeing out there in the grocery industry. But also I can tell you that there are so many folks in the grocery industry that are cross trained, and same for retail, right? So whether it's a service agent or a cashier or a sales agent, being able to, acquire additional shifts without violating any labor laws at their discretion, right? So whether they want to work, the 38 hours, or they're able to pick up more hours, it gives them that opportunity to pick up additional hours in a qualified area. So we've seen this also in a lot of the unionized facilities that we have, where more and more CBAs and more unions have become I'd like to say late adopters, but really adopters of the digital workplace, right? Because it does provide that opportunity from a level set and from a fairness standpoint across the board, and they have those controls in place.
Jeff, I may have missed it, and I know a number of our grocery convenience store customers do it, but the ability to swap schedules. While they may be set schedules, I may not be able to work Tuesday, but you can pick it. Did you bring that up, or and I just missed it?
I don't know that I think I touched on it more from a shift perspective per shift, but absolutely, Mike, spot on, is being able to trade a set of shifts, or a schedule, if you will, with other associates directly, and all things being even with the qualifications that are out there. It definitely levels that playing field, and obviously makes the managers' lives a lot easier, but gives that frontline staff that opportunity to change those schedules around, both in groceries and C-store and convenience retail that's happening out there today, to where, hey, I had something come up, I need to remove this whole schedule, and they can offer up schedules with other folks in the organization, entire shifts of schedules. So.
Okay, and it looks like we have one other question, and maybe I'll take this one, but how do you navigate issues when you have certain union reps who do not act in good faith, or are just looking to start unnecessary trouble? It's a pain in the neck. Let's start with that. Again, and I'm not trying to substitute for your labor lawyer. I absolutely believe that you should go there, but what I used to recommend to our team is have a manager go offer service to the person, to walk up and ask them if they can, what they can do to help them, what questions they have. Again, if they're outside, it's a little more limited what you can do, but if they're actually in your work site or in your workplace, you can do that. If they become highly disruptive, you can ask them to leave. But more often than not, if they're doing that kind of activity and you're still being very professional, the frontline workers kind of look at it and kind of back off of that too, unless it's really disintegrated into an ugly situation. So I find that to be the best thing. But again, not knowing the business, the industry, that kind of thing, my recommendation is, if you have it, get some advice from labor lawyers. If it happens and you're surprised, just go ask them what you can do to help them. I think that's about it in time, Joelle, but
we do have one more question that I think we might have time for, if you don't mind. Someone asked, this looks like yet another app we're supposed to use. How really will this make our lives easier? And maybe that's a really great way to wrap up. Mike, talk to us about that.
Jeff, you want me to?
Yeah, Mike, I'll be happy to, in terms of making life easier and have to use. I think the one thing, as I address this, have to is a funny thing. Very few of our customers have mandates in terms of an app. What happens is it becomes one that they want to use because they want to have that visibility, whether it's in terms of their schedule and the ability to flex those schedules. The whole, when you look at the concept of a digital workplace, is to bring all these elements of operations under one umbrella. And it doesn't mean that, it's not necessarily from a core, but it's that integration. It's that Internet of Things that happen out there that you're able to bring in and put it under one user experience. There was a survey done, I don't know, I think it was 3-4 years ago, Mike, that talked about the digital footprints on organizations out there and the average number. I can tell you my experience in working with our customers, that have, on average, from a frontline standpoint, have 10 different to 15 different systems out there. Having one point of entry out there, it becomes an app not that they have to use, but they want to use. It's become part of their, from the very first day of their onboarding, has become ingrained in that culture there.
Yeah, and I think that and I know you've shared this with me before, but the ability for somebody to take a training, have that show up on their schedule, the fact that they've done it, offer them new opportunities, they maybe can do a new task or something that's going on. The fact that it's all integrated into one is what makes it a very powerful, powerful suite of tools. To your point, that eliminates a lot of what else may be out there. And I think, again, you said it, and I'm just going to reinforce this so we're done. It's the ability to have in my hand a single device that I can go to one place and get all the information I need to for my work life or my life that I'm at work. And that's what's called enhancing the employee experience. I don't have to think about 5 or 6 different systems to go into.
Absolutely.
So with that, I think we're out of time, Joelle. Thank you for
Yes.
guiding us through this.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you guys so much for such an intriguing presentation. We will close out now. Just a reminder to HCI members, today's webcast has been approved for HRCI and SHRM credit, as well as for HCI recertification. Your credits for attending this webcast will soon show up in your My HCI profile under the transcript tab. While you're there, don't forget to check out hci.org for even more insights, as well as information on our certifications, virtual conferences, premium membership, and more. I'd like to say one more thank you to our presenters today and to all of the good people at WorkJam. And of course, I'd like to thank you, our webcast viewer. Thanks for spending an hour with us, and we'll see you next time.